So I'm Mike Bianco. I'm the kind of artist that believes that an artist can use any kind of material they want as long as it gets at the idea that they're trying to work at. So sometimes I work with food, sometimes I work with clay. Most recently, and for many years now, I've been working with bees. And I would argue that I'm working with bees as a kind of material. So for me, really nothing is off limits. The way that I frame how I got interested in bees is I preface it by saying that I'm a cook. And I'm a very passionate home cook. I'm not a chef, I'm a home cook. And I'm very passionate about food, and I'm very passionate about eating. And if you're passionate about food and you're passionate about eating, then you're passionate about where your food comes from. Many years ago, I was sharing a meal with an artist friend, and this friend was telling me how they were going to get back into beekeeping. They were a beekeeper as a kid, and they wanted to get back into beekeeping again. And I, at that point, discovered how much European honeybees were responsible for the pollination of the vast majority of food we consume, certainly in a food system that is based in a sort of Western colonial sense of food. So it was at that point when I learned about the bee crisis and decided I want to get into bees and explore these issues. And since then, it's been this ongoing investigation about our relationship and dependence on honeybees. I was in the United States doing work with bees and social practice and food, and became aware of the program at Symbiotica at University of Western Australia. At the same time, my partner found a position at UWA, and so she applied for the position, I applied for the PhD, and we both got them. It just seemed like things kind of came together in a nice way. So I came to Perth in 2015. I mean, it sounds like such a trope, but I feel like I've always been an artist. At a very young age, like, 6 or 7, was sort of enamored with art. I would go to museums. I grew up in the Bay Area of California, and so I would go to different museums in San Francisco and look at art. And then at some point, couldn't quite make up my mind about whether to pursue a life in the natural sciences or to pursue a life in art. And I would present this to people, and they couldn't make sense of it. And it wasn't until very recently that I was able to find this program and this place where art and science and an engagement with the environment could actually come together. So where does art begin for an artist? You pick up something that makes something, and it's exciting, and you get hooked on it. That's the only way I can explain it, The themes I explore in my practice are largely focused on interspecies relationships, and in particular, the relationship of humans to non-humans, largely within this context of environmental change, and looking at humans as a species that are primary actors that are creating this change. I'm interested in other interspecies relationships. For instance, I'm very interested in the relationship between trees and bees. But in general, I would say that I'm interested in these relationships and largely thinking about it as forms of hospitality. What are those forms of hospitality that various species have with each other? We live in a time of tremendous environmental change. Climate change and environmental change and these major global shifts are in fact the issue of our time. I think that's why asking these questions about what my relationship is to the non-human world and what are the relationships of these non-humans to each other, in light of the fact that things are shifting so radically and so quickly, is for me the most important thing to explore, because it opens up all kinds of questions and problems, which frankly are quite interesting. And as an artist, trying to explore what are the issues of our time that we should be engaging, for me, there's nothing more exciting than asking questions about life in this time of tremendous change. I've always been interested in craft, and I've always been interested in exploring materials. And I think I started out with a kind of traditional understanding of plastic arts and really interested in that. And as time has gone on, I've gotten more and more interested in the conceptual. And so I think as someone who comes from a background in what I would say is craft and clay, then into curatorial practice and institutional critique, into working with tissue in a lab, I think there's been a pretty radical progression in terms of the kind of work that I do. But I guess the underlying track in all of that is really trying to just explore the world and trying to maintain that sense of wonder and exploration and pushing the edges of what it is that an artist can do. I think the feedback I get in regards to my work is mixed. Sometimes people respond to it really positively and they love it. So for instance, for the Pika exhibition Radical Ecologies, I did this installation of a bee bed, which was a bed for sleeping with bees, a platform for sleeping with bees. And some people loved it and they were like, oh, I love bees now and I want to be close to bees and this is such a great experience too. Why would you want to sleep with bees? That sounds crazy. Or are there really bees in here? But I would say in general, I'm not trying to make work that people will love me for. I think that was something that I was making work and everybody loved it, this food work, and they were like, oh, it tastes so good. And it was like, that's not the point here, you know? So I think more and more I'm trying to make work that actually challenges people, and I don't really care if they like it or not. For me, good artwork, and I'm not saying I'm a good artist or I do good artwork, but I think any good artist and any good artwork opens up that moment of contemplation for an audience member in which they begin to actively question and think about their world. And so I'm trying to do that. I don't know if I'm successful at it, but that's what I'm trying to do with my work. I think being an artist right now is hard. Not that it hasn't always been hard, but I think it's particularly hard right now. The challenges artists face with a kind of wave of global conservatism and what that wave does to censor artists that want to make political statements is certainly a barrier. The barriers which inhibit adequate funding for artists is a major barrier. I mean, I feel like more and more audiences are turning away from art experiences and towards entertainment. And I think one of the barriers there is this conflation of art and entertainment, that art should be entertaining. The arts branch of the local government here has now been incorporated into gaming. It says to me there's a real misunderstanding of what it is that art does. And that, you know, I think in Australia, as an American, go ahead and hate me for this, I think the proclivity to lean towards arts festivals rather than arts exhibitions is a major problem. And I think there's this idea of social efficacy, that art has to be entertaining, it has to put butts in seats, it has to be good for commerce because taxpayers are paying for it, that we end up with art that is spectacular, that's pretty, that's bright, that's, you know, stimulating. It facilitates a kind of magpie culture rather than opening up forms of critical discourse. And this to me is a major problem. You know, as an artist who wants to ask critical questions and wants to challenge people, it's a real barrier if you're in an environment where A, those kinds of things aren't necessarily being funded or not actively being funded or not widely being funded, and B, audiences are not interested in being challenged. What I do as an artist is I try to confront those problems by talking to people, teaching, and continuing to show my work in whatever means and methods I can. That's how I deal with those barriers. But I would really like to see a lot more artists push for those things too. So what keeps me here is I like underdogs. Very often you hear about these really good artists who are doing projects in Sydney or Melbourne or Adelaide even. And I can't tell you the number of times they say they're from Perth. They came from Perth and they left Perth and they went somewhere else because they couldn't make this work. Like, it's actually quite common. And it drives me crazy because I think if people would just stay and create that critical mass, I'd like to believe some things would change. And so as someone who likes underdogs, you know, I like this place because I like the fight. I'm not interested in being famous. I'm not interested in being rich. I'm interested in living an interesting life, and it'd be really nice if my work would help me make more work and open up opportunities to work with other artists, and in particular young artists, to develop an exciting and progressive arts community and society. I think it's possible here, but I think this place has to want it. I'm really flattered to be in a Perth artist documentary. But I'm the first to acknowledge I haven't been here very long, and I want to see it get stronger. But, I'm the new guy, so take what I say with a grain of salt, like